All right, everybody, how you doing? Whenever you start a drawing, so this is the still life, right? It's a bunch of objects thrown together. Deliberately, I made a separate video on that, the way it's arranged. But I'm going to talk about sketching out thumbnail sketches before you proceed with the main drawing. The reason I'm saying thumbnails, or we call them thumbnail sketches, just means small sketches. Does not mean sketches as large as a thumbnail. It's just you're not really too concerned about the measuring, the sighting, and all that stuff. You're just kind of figuring out a composition. What you're going to include, what you're not going to include, if you're going to crop anything off, where is it going to be cropped off, stuff like that. You don't want to think about that in the middle of a drawing when you're committing to it. You find out you only have so much room and it's going to be, it is what it is kind of a situation. So you want to pre-plan it a little bit. So you grab a sketchbook, you can just get another sheet of paper and draw on top of it and just use that as your guide. And I also like to use a soft pencil. This is a 2B. You can use a B or a 2B. It's a little bit more greasy, it's buttery, so it allows you to be more sketch-like. It's kind of a different way of thinking. When you use a harder pencil for the main drawing, that's when you're going to think more like an architect would, pre-planning, taking your time, being very careful. In this case, you're not being very careful, you're just kind of throwing the stuff down. So I'm just going to put my sketch pad here. You can hold yours like this if you want, whatever's easiest, it's not a big deal. So see if I can kind of throw, I'll put it here so everybody can see what I'm doing. So first thing I'm going to do is just kind of rough off my composition, or my format, my frame. And that represents the frame of the paper you're using. Try to keep it within the same proportion. It's shorter than it is long, the paper that I'm using here. And after you do that, then you can start to fill it in. If you go outside the border, or you do something that you don't want to do within the border, you can always adjust the border. You just make the border bigger. That's why I gave myself a little room around here. So I'm just going to start off with, I'm going to keep this a central figure because that's kind of how I designed it. And here we go. Hopefully you can see. And as I'm throwing this in, I'm not too concerned about, yeah, there's an ellipse there. There's an ellipse there at the bottom. I'm just going to do something like that. I'm not too concerned about the spout. I'm not too concerned about the handle. If I want to throw a handle or a spout like that in it, you can just like quickly suggest it. You want to be fast. The next thing, this plastic form is inside of it, inside the bottle, what I mean, or the pitcher there. And again, I'm not too concerned about perfection here. I'm just kind of throwing this together. Handle, there's a glass right here. Going down. There's this. Yeah, I cited for a quick second. So you kind of see I'm just kind of roughing this in, just a quick sketch. I'm kind of blocking my viewpoint. Sometimes I have to throw in a little bit of the citing as a guide. tissue. So, as you notice that the tissue box here goes outside of the frame, part of this rounded form, which is the wooden spoon up there, also goes out of the frame. This is what I'm talking about. You can just move the frame. I want to keep the round spoon in the composition because it helps whip your eye back into the drawing. Is the tissue box the only thing I'm going to crop off and nothing else is going to be cropped off? I think that looks a little odd. So maybe I'll include the tissue box. But if I include the tissue box, I have to make my overall frame bigger. Okay? So that's basically what I've come down to. And again, this is a rough sketch. I expect you to do a couple different sketches. You can zoom in a little bit, zoom out, but don't zoom in too much, because the challenge is to draw everything, or as much as you possibly can. But if there's a composition that looks better if you crop in a little bit, so be it. So this is kind of what I'm going to go with. I'm going to include everything. I'm going to keep this border in there, and then I'm going to transfer this onto there. That is super important. And when I do that, I'm going to angle this a little bit towards me, just so you can see my drawing. And I think I'm gonna move my drawing over just a hair because it's really tricky to do that. Maybe I'll just back it up just a hair here too. It's not easy to get all this in. Okay, so again, this is my sketch. I'm gonna rip this out. I have my sketch here. So basically with this sketch, what I'm going to do now is get a really soft pencil so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to cross my corners, right? Cross my corners. Just like in perspective, it finds the center of the image. I'm going to make a vertical line, horizontal line. After that, I'm trying to figure out an object here that I want to start from. It's really important as a starting point to select an object that is somewhat big, simple to draw, is easy to compare and contrast to. Like a simple form. You don't want to go with anything small, even though they're simple forms. I kind of like to stay away from rectangles because they're not easy to draw, and they change as you move to the left or the right. They change their dimensions, and it's kind of hard. I like symmetrical forms, and this is too small. This is too small. My only candidate, because it's central as well, is this guy. And I'm going to just only use the widest part, which is here at the bottom, and its height. And I'm going to use that to build all the other information from. So, where does this object exist on my drawing? How big is it on my drawing? How can I transfer that over onto my larger drawing? That's the question. That's what you're going to do. So since we divide this in half, it gives us an idea where things are. So if you look at this line down the middle, this object here, when I drew it, even though I didn't measure in sight, it's close enough. That's all I care about. Even though, or the right side of this touches the center point. What I'm going to do, I'm going to angle this way so you can kind of see what I'm doing. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to find the center point. I'm going to go back to my H pencil. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to guess what the center is. Because even if my location of this is off by a hair, it's not that big of a deal. I have a lot of room on both sides for flexibility purposes. So this looks central to me, okay? What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna draw a line straight now. But I'm not using that ruler. I'm gonna pick it up. I'm gonna use this ruler because I'm gonna use the graph paper like I did in some of the other, the graph lines. I'll get it in some other videos to draw a vertical line straight down. So hopefully you can see that line I put down. It's really light and faint because I want to keep it that way for now. That line represents this line. It just so happened that the side of that form lined up almost perfectly with that line. And it just so happens the center line in this direction lines up perfectly with that line. If it didn't line up perfectly, if it was a little above or below, then put it above or put it below. I've had students also draw the cross lines here and just transfer that one object. After you transfer the one object, the proportion of it, you don't need this anymore. You're done. You just put it down. So I'm going to try to find the center point here. And I'm just going to use my hands to see if it's central. A little bit off. But I have a lot of room to play because there's so much space down there. Yeah, I think right here will be fine. Okay, so what I'm going to do is get my handy ruler here. And if you don't have one this long and you can't kind of do that line that I'm trying to do, you can always measure up from here, mark it, measure up from the bottom, mark it again, and then draw a straight line. It's just a couple more steps. This is just a little faster. So I put a line here, I put a line there. That basically articulated two sides of this form, because all I'm putting in is a rectangle right now. Stage one, after the sketches, stage 1A is the sketches. Stage 1B is drawing the proportion and location of all the objects, only as rectangles. You're not going to draw the individual characteristics of the form, just rectangles. Placement and proportion. So the whole thing should look like a bunch of overlapping rectangles when you're finished in the very first stage. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm looking at, if you look here, if I were to cross this line right there, right, it finds the center here, and I can put a line. What I'm trying to do is I'm breaking down the space so I can kind of figure out where this thing is, where the other side of this form is, because basically I'm trying to draw this thing. There's the ellipse. It exists right there. I'm trying to draw this in a similar proportion, and I can build out. So I found my halfway point. I'm going to look at from here to here. I'm going to mark what I think the halfway point is, which I just did. I'm going to double check to see if it's equivalent on both sides. Just using my hand, because it doesn't have to be so perfect. You're just kind of roughing this in. Everything else after this has to be perfect. And then if you look at this, this is, if you were to dissect the space in half again, this is a little bit to the left of it. So if I were to dissect the space in half again, it'd be right there. This looks like it's like right here. So that being said, I just went a little bit to the left of that. And I'm putting a line in. I haven't done anything yet, really, in terms of drawing, but I'm trying to locate this guy. And I think I'm going to draw it just a little bit darker so you can see this at home. My first line was here. Second line was here. If it's too dark, I can always use it. Need an eraser to light it. Okay, so you can see this is that guy so far. I don't have my height established, but I do have my width established. If you have the height or width, in this case we have the width established, of any form, you can figure out the other side, meaning you can find, if you have the width established, like we do, yeah, I can find the height. If I have the height established, I can find the width. What I mean by that is now I'm going to measure this form and find out its individual proportion. Width, because that's the short side, counted into its height. So I'm going to do that right now. Basically what I would do is I would measure its width, and then you count it into its height. And at a quick measurement here, it counted 1 to 2. I don't think that's going to be the case when I measure from my viewpoint. So the widest part is at the very bottom. 1. So from my viewpoint, it measured 1 to 1.5. So if I were to take this width here, I'm going to use the other side of this paper. So if I were to take this width here, and then times it, that's 1. And then I broke this in half, just make sure it's equivalent on both sides. Not totally. But, and then I went from here to here, and I added that on to the height. That's my height. I just roughed it in with my hand, but now I'm going to put it in with the ruler. And the nice thing about this is it looks like I'm going to have room for the little wooden spoon at the top. If not, this is the time where you can lower it. And I might take advantage of that because it's wooden spoon. The ellipse would be about here. The wooden spoon's going to come out. It's going to come out right here. It's going to be a little too close to that border, that edge. I don't know if I like it that close. So I think I'm going to lower this whole thing down just a little bit because I have plenty of room. I have plenty of room. I think I have plenty of room. What I'm doing right now is I'm measuring from here to here to see if that measures into the bottom part, to see if I can fit everything else in. So if I were to do here, yeah. So I'm gonna move this down just a smidge. But the nice thing about rectangles, it's so easy to move down. I'm gonna move it down this much. Which means I'm going to move this down the same amount, and it's about 2 little spaces. I can even eye that, and it's about that far down. And so I don't confuse myself later, I'm definitely going to erase this top part. I'm going to erase this part here. Now again, the reason I made that decision is because I have room down here. I have a lot of space down there, so it's not a big deal. I didn't have that much space here, and I wanted to be able to fit that wooden spoon in. So I'm good. So now, this rectangle here is my starting point. Now before I go any further, I'm going to make sure my rectangle is a perfect rectangle parallel to both sides of the paper. How do I do that? I'm going to actually use my ruler. I'm going to use the back side of this ruler because I can mark it. You see some of the marks I put on it? Because I don't want to memorize any numbers here. I'm just going to use it as a marking point. So I'm going to mark this right here. If you can see what I'm doing, I'll put it on this side. So I'm using the side of the paper, or I could use this, I'll use the side of the paper right here. And I'm marking this side. I'm also marking this side. if it lines up perfectly here, you know you have a straight line. So I have two perfectly vertical straight lines. Great. I don't have to make adjustments there. The horizontal lines, I'm unsure about. Same thing though. I'm going to mark the edge of the paper here. I'm going to mark this line. Bring it over. Perfect. I'm in good shape. So I have a really good base as a starting point. Based on my sketch, I was basically trying to find this little square here, and I found it. It's proportioned similar to what my sketch is, and now I can start drawing. So what I'm going to do is make a part 2 video to this, and we'll use this as a starting point. This is called our point of reference, and then we're going to build from that point on, okay?